Hello, my name is Chris McDonald. I'm with the New Hampshire Charter of the Saber Legion, and today I want to do a quick video on basics. And the basics that I want to discuss today and demonstrate are stances. Now, stances are something that I consider to be foundation to everything else we do. When we're practicing them, they allow us to work on our strength and our flexibility, and when we're utilizing them in our dueling and our sparring, it allows us to make sure that we're having the proper body mechanics, that the body alignment is there, and that allows us to have strikes with more power and more accuracy. So, a couple of things before I begin. One is, whatever level you are at, work at that level. You're going to see sometimes people do really deep stances, and if you've never done stance work before, you might hurt yourself. So work to whatever level you are right now with the goal of developing better stances, of being able to hold those stances longer. Secondly, what I'm going to demonstrate and talk about are things that, how I've learned them and how I've taught others when I was a martial arts instructor. Now, if you're working with another instructor and they say do this differently, by all means do it differently. My way is not the only way. I just want to get the information out there for people that don't have a lot of experience. And finally, when I'm discussing directions, I use a clock method to describe the direction. In other words, if I'm facing forward, that's 12 o'clock. If I'm turning to my right, my right is at 3 o'clock. My left is at 9 o'clock. Behind me is at 6 o'clock. So I can use the clock to visualize where I need to be facing and going and that type of thing. So with that in mind, I'm going to begin. The first stance we're going to talk about is the horse stance. And basically, the horse stance is you have your feet approximately shoulder width apart, maybe a little bit wider. I prefer a little bit wider than shoulder width, but right around shoulder width is where you want to be. My weight is going to be centered, so I'm going to have my weight 50% on one foot, 50% on the other foot. I like to pivot my feet in a little bit. That's not necessary, but I find from what I've done in the past that helps. And then I want to bend my knees. And when I bend my knees, I want to make sure my knees are not going past my toes. So if I can see my toes, great. If I can't see my toes, then I probably need to reevaluate what I'm doing. So anyway, I'm bending at the knees. I'm pulling my hips back. My back is straight. My shoulders are expanded. And what I like to do is, if I'm just sitting in a horse stance, is to have my hands right pulled back here. This is more of a traditional martial arts training tool, but it prevents my hands from just flopping around all over the place, and that way I don't have to worry about them. So here again, my knees are bent, my hips are pulled back, shoulders are expanded, and I'm looking straight ahead, and that should give you a really good horse stance. As you progress, you can increase your horse stance by stepping out and working it that way, but for our purposes today, we're just going to keep the feet shoulder width apart and work on that. So from the side view, here again, feet are shoulder width apart, knees are bent, hips are pulled back, back is straight, shoulders are expanded, and I'm looking straight ahead. And what that is going to do, in addition to having a really stable foundation, it's also going to work on strength and endurance if you hold that stance for a long period. So the second stance is a forward stance. And basically it's one foot forward and the other foot back. A really good way to get into that is to start off in your horse stance and then just pivot. Pivot to either 1030 or 130, and that will get you into your forward stance, either left forward stance or right forward stance. So as you can see, my one foot is forward, one foot is back, and I would probably say the weight ratio is 60-40. 60% on my forward foot, 40% on my rear foot. Going back, and now going to the other side. So like I said, this is just a really easy way to maintain the proper width while getting into that stance. So from a forward view, I'll start off at my horse stance angled and then just pivot, and here I am in a forward facing forward stance. And then from the side, I start off in my horse stance and then I pivot, and there I am. And that's, here again, that is just one way to get into that stance. Once you get used to that stance, you can just step into it. So another stance, and before I go into any of these other stances, some of these stances have direct application to dueling, and others are just more for training purposes. As you know, dueling is a constant ebb and flow, back and forth. You're constantly moving, so you're probably not going to be sticking in one stance for a long period of time. But I think it's important to have a library of different stances to practice and work on balance, strength, flexibility, and all of those things. So the next stance is a transitional stance. It's called the cat stance or a false stance or an empty stance. So we're going to have one foot back, and we're going to draw our front foot back towards us. My weight is 90% on the rear leg and about 10% on the front leg. Very little weight on that front foot. And like I said, this is just a transitional stance. Here again, going back to the dueling, if it's used, it's not going to be something that you're going to be just sitting there. So from a side view, as you can see, my weight is on my rear leg, and I have very little weight on my front leg. And when I'm lifting it up, it's just to demonstrate that there's not a whole lot of weight on that front leg. So far we've covered the horse stance, the front forward stance, and the cat stance, or the false stance, or whatever you want to call it. The next stance is a martial arts stance, and it is more geared towards developing balance, but it's a good one to work on the balance with. And that is commonly referred to as a crane stance. And we're going to get our weight on one foot, and we are simply going to raise our leg up, and I have my thigh flat, and we're just going to hold it, and that becomes a crane stance, and it works on strength and balance. So from the side, here again, I'm placing all my weight on the rear leg, and then I'm just lifting up my forward leg, and that is essentially your crane stance. And the last stance I'm going to cover today is what is commonly referred to as either a twist stance or a cross stance, and they're both basically the same thing, just slight different positioning and that type of thing. And here again, this is not something that you're likely to use in dueling, but from a body conditioning perspective, it's really good for strengthening, and for flexibility. So, a couple of ways to get into the twist stance. One is to start in a horse stance and twist, and then I drop my weight down, and this is the twist stance. So I can do that from the back as well, facing in the opposite direction, and I twist, and I drop my weight down, and my weight is equally distributed between the two, with a little bit more weight on the forward foot, obviously. Another way that I can get into the twist stance or the cross stance is to just step and drop down. So those are the basic stances that I've been taught and that I've taught others. Here again, some of these have direct application to dueling, others don't. But I wanted to get the information out there for reference material and whatnot. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps. And have a great day, and may the force be with you.